This is A New Angle, a show about cool people doing awesome things in and around Montana. I'm your host, Justin Angle. This show is supported by First Security Bank, Blackfoot Communications, and the University of Montana College of Business. Hey folks, welcome back, and thanks for tuning in. Today is our June edition of Incentives and Instincts, a recurring series in which I speak with economist and friend Bryce Ward about some of the broader challenges facing our society. Bryce, how are you today?
Sun is shining.
It is out, isn't it?
Yeah.
Beautiful day here in Montana. So we've been putting this one off for a long time, but I think we finally have to do it. It's time to talk about AI, artificial intelligence. Are you ready?
Sure.
So here at the College of Business at the University of Montana, the central conceit of our mission statement is the concept of a better life. In theory, everything we do should roll up into creating the opportunity for a better life for students, faculty, and staff. And it's unclear to me how AI contributes to a better life. So I'm going to start there, or I try to start there in how I think about it. How do you think about AI? What's your starting point?
Yeah, I think that's the right framework. To me, it's just what are the benefits and what are the costs,
Sure.
right? So to me, it's just standard economic trade-off question, right? I want to be clear that there are clear benefits from AI. It's not clear to me that we, A, understand what those are going to be, and more importantly, the ultimate cost of it remains very vague. And we keep just kind of pushing forward because it's some race that we have to win, apparently.
I mean, the best case for that is probably like this is a powerful technology, and from a national security standpoint, it's better that if it's developed and understood, and the resources to develop and understand it should be protected here in the United States.
But that still doesn't mean that we need to just keep going without asking the question of how does this lead to a better life? And what are the use cases where it leads to a better life, and what are the ones where it doesn't? Mm-hmm. And how do we make sure that we get the ones that we want while constraining or, in some cases, completely blocking the cases that we don't? And I don't feel like we're having that conversation really at all.
Yeah. My understanding of the standard economic models around technological innovation are that new technologies lead to some job loss, but in aggregate create more jobs, better jobs, higher paying jobs in the long run, and that sort of the technology creates a rising tide that benefits a society over time.
Yeah, but sometimes you have to wait a really long time for that to occur.
Okay.
That's the challenge. So the immediate effect is, so it's a change to the supply curve. And then the big question is what does it do to demand, right? Because sometimes, we got a big increase in supply and there was a huge increase in demand. And so that's how you can, with more productivity, maintain the same employment or even more employment because you have this demand growth. We used to have 40% of our workers in agriculture. Now we have 2%.
Right.
40% in manufacturing, and now it's 9%. So you go through these shifts, but the idea was that you were shifting from something that was hard and difficult, and we shifted you into something that was either physically easier and therefore allowed you to live a more longer productive life, or had more joy and meaning or whatever it is. And so that's where the tension, I think, with AI is going to come in.
Okay. Are there examples in the literature of this process happening rapidly and sort of being a clear net benefit, and then an example of where it took many, many years or decades to play out?
So like ATMs is an example people talk about. Immediately after the introduction of the ATM, I believe that the number of bank tellers continued to increase. It's only relatively recently that they've started to decline. And part of why it's hard to make predictions about new technologies is because there's an adoption period, right? And that adoption period is both the diffusion of the technology, but then the integration of the technology, and then the adjustment of institutions, cultures, or whatever it is, to the opportunities created by the new technology. And typically that does not happen quickly.
Although I think AI adoption is pushing that pace to a new level.
But like in terms of, do you fully incorporate the productivity changes? Mm-hmm. But AI does appear to be operating on quicker scales than I think we're used to. And it also is different. AI is trying to replace human brain power. And when we went through the Industrial Revolution, we only had the human brain power to figure out how to harness the steam power and apply it in various ways, given the machines and technologies we had available.
I think there's two things that set it apart. One, it is agentic, right? It can solve a problem on its own. And also it can improve itself theoretically, it can improve itself at a rate that we don't quite understand yet. So I think those two factors help sort of clarify its distinction from previous technologies.
Yeah, and that's where, it makes it harder to then say, well, look, we're going to follow the same pattern we followed in the past. Again, it's worth remembering that even in the past, the world of Charles Dickens was not a world of wealth and prosperity.
The best of times, the worst of times.
Yeah, it was a world of a large portion of the population subject to the initial phases of the Industrial Revolution lived at or below subsistence.
Right.
It took decades for it to translate into widespread shared prosperity. And it required political movements to take the wealth that was created by the Industrial Revolution and distribute it more evenly across society.
Okay, so regulatory frameworks, taxation policies, social policies, etc. Before we get down into those weeds too far, let's go back to this concept of a better life. How do economists think about this notion of better life, flourishing? How does that get operationalized in anything other than just utility?
Yeah, that's pretty much how we try and operationalize it, right? Utility, social welfare functions, things like that, which, are imperfect. So we're trying to write out functions so that you can do math that then you can try and understand implications of different assumptions or different functional forms, whatever it is that you're putting in your model. Yes, better life is inherently a question of the humanities, right? It's a philosophical question. It is not exclusively a function of economics. And certainly economists have our core concepts that we will look at. That's what comes out of math.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily have to apply to humans. I think we're allowed to know it when we see it. Like widespread agreement that increasing healthy life expectancy is probably a indicator of better life.
That seems like a good thing for society to pursue.
And so what goes into that? Well, you need resources to help people figure out how to be healthier and access care when things go wrong. Those seem like important parts of better life. But then after that, you're into subjective. To some degree, I think other parts of a good life are you find meaning, you find joy, and obviously people do that and their preferences are varied, but you need a platform to allow people to satisfy their innate human needs. And those go beyond just food, water, shelter, right? Like it's also like I have a role in a community, I'm socially accepted, I'm, all of the things that drive us as humans.
We can conjure and list plenty of use cases for AI that are positive, beneficial. I use it in ways to help me make sense of information, to gather information, get an answer to a question more effectively. It tends to be a more efficient search engine than just typing something into Google. So I don't think we're denying that there are positive use cases. Where I start to get skeptical is when we talk about business models. What is the business model that AI will be built upon? That can get dismissed as a human problem. What do you think about as far as the core problem of concern with AI?
I am concerned that it takes away a lot of opportunities for people to find that ability to contribute, to find that meaning. We're pushing you from your natural gift into some secondary or tertiary thing where, you were really exceptional at this. And you're pretty good at this. Maybe you can find a role that's pretty good, but the thing that you were exceptional at, you don't get to do anymore. That's the artist thing, right? If you're an artist, if you want to be a writer, it's going to be much, much harder to carve out a role in a world of AI.
Yeah, let's break that down, how that happens. It seems to me that there's always going to be demand for beautiful prose and literature and the integration of ideas across broad swaths of ideologies and so forth. And to me, that's not the sort of thing that's under threat directly. It's under indirect threat, because to get to a point where you can create at that level, you have to have such repetition and experience, and those opportunities for intro-level copy editors, intro-level copywriters, technical writers for software companies, this sort of the amount of writing that happens on a day-to-day basis across a broad swath of the economy is huge. And that seems to be, at least initially, the sort of writing that will be displaced by AI.
There's several layers of threat, right? So there's, I think we can call what you just described the pipeline threat. We're putting fewer people into the pipeline.
Yeah.
Because they're going to get squeezed out by AI, right? And they're going to get shoved into something else. We're shrinking the set of people that might be on a path to ultimately achieve that pinnacle level status, right? So that's the first potential culling, right? Is we're shrinking the pipeline of people going into these things. The next thing is what more jobs are now subject to superstar effects.
Okay.
We've had superstar effects for a long time in actors and musicians and athletes. What AI does is it creates more and more places now subject to superstar effects. Maybe not at the same scale, right? Because there's probably still some limits on the scale of how much a lawyer can do or how much a doctor can do. But you're shrinking not just the entry to the pie, but you're shrinking the number of people who can have a good standard of living from pursuing whatever it is, but you're increasing the returns to a handful.
How does superstar effects in this context shift incentives, and how does that change behavior of the actors within the pipeline?
The easiest way is just look at the cultures that already exist around trying to be an actor or a musician.
Or influencer culture is a great example.
Influencer culture.
TikTok fame is the ultimate superstar effect market.
So lots of people can do it.
Yeah.
Lots of people will try to do it.
Or our perception is lots of people can do it.
No, they will try to do it.
Oh, the barriers to entry are low.
The barriers to entry are low. Their odds of success are infinitesimal. So you end up, and so you have these cultures, the actor culture in LA and New York. So more and more people will live in those cultures. And are those cultures that we want to see spread widely or not? Because let's be very clear about what those are, right? They're cultures of extreme anxiety, living on a knife edge, lots of people existing at subsistence while they try and pursue the other thing.
Incentives to take work for no pay or under abject conditions.
Yeah. And then a lot of resentment towards those who get over the line. But increasingly, that may be the only real choice, right? Is that you have to pursue your 15 minutes and you've got to figure out how to monetize those 15 minutes permanently. And you're just jumping from wild swing after wild swing after wild swing, and our culture is not designed. Americans are more adept at that. But for the most part, for the vast majority of people for the past century, we've lived in a linear world. Go to school, work hard, get the job, well then do this, and you will just follow if you just do the things, then you will be okay. And AI has the potential to move us into a world where that is just less true.
Let's get into how that's less true. How does AI take, let's say, journalism or entry-level coding for a software company? How does that introduce superstar effects into those markets?
The research on AI suggests it does two things. So the first thing it does is it takes people who are below average and allows them to become average. This is the superstar effect, right? Even, in my world of consulting or in law or whatever it is, right? Okay, it used to take me this long to produce a report because, I had to go to Google. I had to search for these things. I had to pull out textbooks and remind myself of different things, whatever it might be. Well, now, I can have AI do it and I can shrink what used to be a 10-hour task into a 2-hour task.
We'll be back to my conversation with Bryce Ward after this short break. A New Angle is proudly presented by First Security Bank, Blackfoot Communications, and the University of Montana College of Business. This show does not happen without these pillars of our community, and I'm so grateful for their support and encouragement. And speaking of support, have you checked out our new website yet? anewanglepodcast.com. There you can support our show directly with a variety of subscription options. Subscribers get access to bonus episodes, additional segments, writings, and other benefits. So check it out at anewanglepodcast.com.
This is Meg Oliver, CBS News correspondent, and you're listening to A New Angle.
Hey folks, on July 17th, A New Angle and Five Valleys Land Trust are teaming up to present This Didn't Happen by Accident, Stories of Intention on the Land. Join us for an evening of food, drinks, and discussion with a gorgeous view at the Line Ranch in Missoula. I'll be moderating a panel conversation with Donna Erickson, author of Rooted on the Edge, Bruce Bugbee, co-author of Saving the Big Sky, co-author of A Gracious Civic Enterprise, and Whitney Schwab, executive director of Five Valleys Land Trust. This is going to be a great event, and I hope you can join us. Space is limited, so head over to fvlt.org for more information. Welcome back to A New Angle. I'm speaking with Bryce Ward about AI and what it means for humanity. So what you're describing there doesn't sound fundamentally different than prior technological innovations as far as those two effects go.
No, to some degree, we've had these kind of scaling effects to various levels forever, right?
Sure.
It's just the extent. And look, how much AI changes the extent is what will determine how much it changes the real world.
It's a huge change as far as like how we do education. We invested a lot of effort, and there was a long period of time where it was like the next step beyond getting fluent in the Microsoft Office suite was being able to code in such a way, like being able to be inside the computer, if you will. But now learning programming languages is no longer a necessary tool to advance in the software industry because you can outsource that task to an AI.
Well, all we're really saying is how much does it change the potential individual productivity? So if it's only actually changes things moderately, then it will only have moderate real world changes. But to the extent it allows for big changes in scale, you move increasingly into the superstar effect world, which brings with it very different expectations about life, very different in what we need culture to adapt you for, differences in what your expectations are. My ultimate fear with AI, the big fear with AI, is that it actually ends humanity, and not in the Terminator version of the AI takes care of the weapons and starts killing people.
Sure, okay.
It ends the desire to create humans. If I look around and I'm like, there's not much meaning to be had, there's not much role for a human in the society, why would I create another human?
As you say, that AI could potentially curb the incentives to propagation.
Yeah,
procreation. Is it possible we're already experiencing that? I mean, there's lots of reasons for the declining birth rates across the industrialized world, but is what's happening with tech part of that?
I think it is to some degree, right? I mean, look, the decision to have kids is a choice.
Yeah.
Like, you have to choose to engage in the behaviors that lead to kids. I do think that to the extent that you're already seeing people who are not optimistic about their own lives, the decision to have a kid is fundamentally an incredibly optimistic choice.
Yeah, I think if you don't view it that way, you're sort of caught up in the assumption that it is, I suppose.
And in a world of controlled fertility,
yeah,
right, where it is a choice to have a kid, it requires optimism. Now, historically, it wasn't much of a choice, right?
Sure.
We just had kids. We were animals, and we procreated, and kids came out. But in the advanced world, the industrialized world, where birth control is widely available, it's a choice, right? And it requires optimism. We overplay the cost of having a kid, and we underplay the benefits of having a kid.
Yeah.
In our culture and in our society. We choose to do it. And when you choose to do it, you're doing so because you're like, this will be good for me, but also I'm optimistic that this will be good for you. And My concern with AI, with I'll call the Bill Gates version of AI, which is that AI will do everything within 10 years.
Okay. So the need for work as we know it will be eliminated.
It's basically a choice. Once you move into that world, the question is can I create meaning in a life without the need for work?
That's a big question. And I don't think that humans have ever... we've conceptualized work in so many different ways. Before industrialization, it was caring for your basic needs and the needs of those around you in your household or in your tribe or your community or whatever it was, however it was conceived. Then specialization of labor. It doesn't occur to me that we're equipped as a society to deal with that challenge.
It's not clear that we're adept as individuals, much less society.
Yeah,
right?
Well put.
I think there is something fundamentally human. We're social creatures. You have a role to do. I do this thing, I have a job, there's a role. And we've already given ourselves way more latitude. And part of why we struggle with a lot of the mental health issues that people struggle with is because they're struggling to be like,
find meaning.
What's my job here?
Yeah.
What's my role? Where's my community?
How can I contribute?
What am I actually contributing? We evolved in a world where that was not a question. Your job was to go get water. Right? Oh, we need that.
Yeah. Water solves a lot of problems.
Oh, you're going to go get the food. Oh, yeah, we need that. The distance between what I'm doing and where meaning is wasn't very far. And we already are living in a world where there's some distance and we struggle with it.
And so I think people can sort of see where this thread is going. When you hear Bill Gates say in 10 years AI will do everything, does your economist brain say, nope? There's this cycle of disruption that all new technologies follow. The sort of question we started this conversation with, do you sort of dismiss the Gatesian view?
I dismiss it in 10 years. There's just too much inertia. It takes longer to actually disrupt existing institutions at that scale.
But maybe it's 100 years.
Yeah.
Same question emerges.
But there's certainly, with what robots are increasingly able to do, there used to be tasks that we still had to do as humans, mostly around dexterity and balance. Well, robots are getting pretty good at those.
Yeah.
Right? There's enough people who are close enough to the frontier who are coming back to the rest of us and saying, yeah, this stuff can do everything. That we should be having the conversation about, well, do we want this? What do we want them to do? What do we want this technology? What do we want to preserve for us as humans? And how do we create a system that does that? Because I've been collecting, as part of my tracking of this, stories of people who got rich and then started to struggle in life. And they go through frequently years of depression and anxiety because they've lost their connection to contribution.
Sure.
You can always reframe that, right? And there's ways to build communities and families and all that kind of stuff to say, well, I'm still here, I'm still contributing here, and maybe that's enough. A couple years ago when ChatGPT first came out, the discussion was very much about AI is going to take over the weapons and then it will decide that humans are bad and start killing us.
Yeah, we're push the button.
And that is not a trivial concern, right? It's a real concern.
Anybody that's been to the new Mission Impossible movie has sat through 3 hours of that concern.
But to me, the bigger thing is if AI does everything, other than a handful of humans who own AI or are required to keep the electricity on for the AI, you're in the WALL-E world of I'm just a human.
Gosh, that movie is so prescient. Go watch WALL-E. It came out, 20 years ago?
Oh, wow ago, yeah.
And the vision of the dystopian vision that this cute cartoon movie paints of the future back then, it's more disturbing now to watch than it was when it came out.
Yeah. And so in that world, I don't see a need to create more humans.
Yeah.
Right? Why? What are you creating them for? I certainly don't need them at the scale that we currently have them. And maybe you think that's a good thing.
There is an argument for that. There's the whole sort of population bomb argument that, the world has a carrying capacity and we're fast approaching the point at which we exceed it. I don't know if you buy into that. Economists a lot of the models rely on more humans to do more work and grow over time. Those are sort of the embedded assumptions.
I tend to be pro-human.
Yeah.
Right? That's where I start, which is those are kids who don't get to exist and don't get to experience all of life. And maybe you don't think life is good or meaningful or worth living. But I do. And I want my kids to have kids.
Yeah.
And, I want my ancestral line to continue. And in an ideal world, I want it to continue in a world which is improved and better than what we're living in.
Yeah.
But if AI does the things, why do I need a human?
So let's shift that back to the business model. And AI proponents will say the business model is a human choice, not an AI choice. At the same time, if you look back historically at technologies, there was sort of this adoption curve, and technological innovations would be high priced. Think of the first time you saw a DVD player. It was like $1,500. And only early adopters would choose to afford that. There would be high margin and then a steep learning curve. And so over time, the products came down in price and would be more accessible to more people and have wide adoption, et cetera. Well, it seems like since the advent of, I don't know quite when it flipped, but sort of software as the driver of tech, the freemium model kind of replaced that process where the product was given away for free. And we were given the product, and our use of the product was a critical input to the improvement of that product. That became the business model. And what underlies that business model in our information markets is the monetization of our attention. And yeah, you can dismiss AI as, hey, it's just a product and the business model is a human choice. At the same time, it sort of feels to me as though AI is the product that's optimally designed for the business model that social media and our information economy has been built around. And so that makes me really skeptical about, will AI in aggregate be a force for good? Yeah, it might solve a lot of important problems, but I think it introduces so much risk based on the evidence that the people who have designed it are responding to incentives that don't lead to good outcomes.
To get the good out of AI, we have to avoid the bad.
Yeah.
We need to price it appropriately. And it needs to be priced with an inverse relationship between the social benefit of what you're doing with it. What is the main thing that ChatGPT, I think, is used for? Turning pictures of you into cartoon images of you.
Yeah.
Is there a social value? Yes, it was fun. But, to me, in the absence of true scarcity, and there is some scarcity, but in the absence of true scarcity, we need to impose scarcity on AI.
Price would be a way to do that.
And price would be, to the economist, that's the way to do it.
It seems to me, though, that if you price AI in that way, it's such an expensive technology. The only people who are going to be able to afford to use it are at the top of the income distribution or the wealth distribution. And those are not the people that necessarily need, that we want benefiting from the superstar effects as you laid out.
If you just price it uniformly high, that just means you're making it available only to people who already have money.
Yeah.
Which is why I prefer price discrimination, which is you pay based on what you're doing.
That's all the time we have for this episode. We'll continue this conversation on AI and its implications and how we move through it next month in our July edition. Okay, Bryce, ready for a listener question? Here we go. This month, we got a question from John Miller, a good friend of the podcast. Let's see what John has to say.
Hi, this is John Miller from Missoula. I have a question about the political forces that will shape debate around the current threat to entitlements. Rural hospitals, and by extension small towns, may have the most to lose from cuts to Medicaid. How much cutting will independents and Trump voters tolerate to programs on which they rely? Love your show. Thanks for taking my question.
Okay, so the implications of cuts to Medicaid and other health benefits that are part of the big, beautiful bill that is in some state of limbo between passage of the House and deliberation in the Senate. How do you think about this?
Look, any policy change, how it actually manifests itself in the form of an election is about how salient is it? Do you actually notice that there was a change and that, that change had some meaningful impact? And then do you attribute it correctly to the people who caused the change? And yeah, so how salient will any kind of change to entitlements be? Well, we don't actually know exactly how it's going to manifest itself yet.
Sure. Well, let's just assume that there's some degree of cut to Medicaid.
But the type of cut changes the salience and for whom. And then, so there's the immediate salience, right? Like I was a beneficiary and I lost my benefits.
Mm-hmm.
Those people will probably be aware of the change.
That's all the time we have for this episode. If you'd like to hear more of this conversation and receive other exclusive content, please consider a paid subscription. Thanks for listening to A New Angle. If you like what we do and want to support us directly, please consider a subscription at anewanglepodcast.com. A New Angle is recorded at Studio 49, a generous gift from UM alums Michelle and Lauren Hansen. Our presenting sponsors are First Security Bank, Blackfoot Communications, and the University of Montana College of Business. Kelly Larson is our producer. Maddie Jordan is our production assistant. VTO, Jeff Ament, and John Wicks made our music. And Jeff Meese is our master of all things sound. Thanks a lot, and see you next time.